Hello, book connectors. Welcome back to the Book Connection. I am your host, Blue Eyed Black Devil, and I am here with a video for the book Fever by Robin Cook. This is my first time ever reading anything of his. However, for some reason, I seem to remember a movie called Fever, and I do remember, for whatever reason, because this book came out in like 1982 or 83, and apparently there was a movie made based on the book. So this is my first time. I don't know how this is going to turn out, so I'll keep my fingers crossed to see how it ends. So this book is listed as in the category of medical fiction, and I'm finding myself enjoying this particular genre. Now, as a whole, does anybody remember the movie John Q, where Denzel Washington's character is going berserk trying to save his child's life? Basically, that's what Fever is to me. Now, I never watched John Q, but I think we have that movie on DVD. I don't even know if my husband looked at it, but that's what I can remember. It was based on, that was the storyline, was Denzel's character going through hell and back trying to save his baby from dying. So in this book, Charles Martel is the main character, and he had lost his wife, his first wife. He lost to cancer 9 years prior. 9 years later, he's remarried to a woman who's 13 years younger than him, and he started out being a doctor. That's what he did. But then he turned that into being a, science researcher. That's what he did. One morning, his 12-year-old daughter, Michelle, wakes up and she just don't feel good. She just wasn't too terribly bad at first, but, she did acknowledge that she was, for whatever reason, under the weather that particular day. And so her stepmother, Catherine, went to tell Charles, that their daughter was sick. And eventually, it just went from bad to worse. Eventually, Michelle was diagnosed with a rare form of leukemia. Charles was hell-bent on saving his daughter's life, even if it meant him never working in that field again at some points, even if it meant him losing his marriage, even if it meant him losing relationship with his two sons. One of his sons, Chuck, they didn't have the best of relationships to begin with. Because Charles wanted at least one of his children to go into medicine like he had done, or research like he had done. I think Charles felt like he lost his wife, their mother, and I think Charles probably was wanting one of them to go into research because they lost their mother the day he lost his wife. But Chuck in particular, neither one of them wanted to go into medicine. And Charles was okay with, what was his son's name? Jean Paul? Or John Paul? No, it was Jean Paul. I can't remember now what it was he wanted to do, but the dad was okay with that. But Chuck was still basically finding his way. He was one of those privileged young men who just kind of did what he wanted to, cost his father money when he was during there failing college and this, that, and the other. Well, like I said, Michelle was only 12. So she was 3 when her mother died. Now, after she got sick and Charles realized, they got the diagnosis first that, she had leukemia. Charles lived, there was a hazardous waste site a few blocks over from where they lived. The Martell family lived. And for whatever reason, Charles got it in his head that whatever this hazardous waste site was making people sick. And so that became his mission to get that waste site closed down. Now, it was one there. But every time he tried to talk to someone about investigating what actually was going on there, he got turned away. And every time he got turned away, his daughter seemed to take a turn for the worst. So this went on, and eventually they kept saying, well, we don't do it, and maybe you need to check with this person or this agency. Well, we don't do it. He would say, well, and I've had this happen to me before. I can call somewhere and explain something, and they'll say, well, no, we don't do this. You need to talk to such and such and such. I get in touch with that person, and they send me right back to the one that told me to go to them in the first place. So basically, that's what was going on with Charles. He knew that time was not on his side in terms of saving his daughter. So by him being a medical doctor in the beginning and then having several years of research under his belt, he just took it upon himself to go in to see if he could steal something. I want to say it was a form of benzene that he basically what he did was used it on himself, and then after he did that, he would inject a dose into his daughter Michelle. But by the time all of that happened, she went from not just being under the weather to where she could not walk, she could barely talk, barely keep her eyes open. When they were open, they said that they were very weak and watery looking. So when they put her in the hospital, it was supposed to be, because whatever type leukemia it was, supposed to have a high weight. They don't live long with it. Her being a child just got to him. So he felt like he was just running up against time, basically, is what it was. But he was so hell-bent on getting that waste site closed down and finding a cure for his daughter. Like I said probably ago, it almost cost him his medicine. And then it got to the point to where his bosses called his wife in, because she was like, when they met, she was working, I don't think she was a secretary. I think she helped him in the research department, medical research department. And and I think by law that's illegal, but anyway, they called her in and they sat her down and just explained to her, look, I don't know what's going on with Charles, but I do know that he has one very sick daughter. And they were wanting to do something. I can't remember what the procedure was, but Charles felt like it wasn't enough. So they basically goaded her into signing off, saying that Charles could no longer have anything to do with what goes on with his daughter, medically speaking. Wow. So, like, if you or your loved one are at odds about something, and um, somebody kind of gets to you and says, look, your loved one is off the chain, and time is not on our side necessarily. And I think we need to just speed things along. So if you don't mind, just relieve him of any parental rights he may have or she may have to said child. I don't know about y'all, but I think this would have been a totally different book if that were to happen to me in my real life. I don't even know anybody where this happened. So I guess this is where poetic licenses come in, because you can just say stuff that you know, realistically speaking, people just don't do. And I don't think it's odd because they don't want to. I think it might be unethical for you to just relinquish a parent's rights to treat or medically treat a child, their child at that. Okay, so back to the story. Eventually, she had to tell Charles what had happened as far as him not having any say-so anymore in her treatment. Charles went to the hospital that night and miraculously stole his daughter. He left the hospital. By the time they discovered that Michelle was gone, no one could find Charles. Catherine goes back home. Okay, now by this time, I forgot to say this. His two older children, Jean Paul and Chuck, were off. I think Jean Paul was living with a friend during all of this time. And then Chuck, yeah, he was supposed to be in boarding school. Well, yeah, no, that's where he flunked out, was at boarding school. And Charles paid for another semester of it. And so he was off doing whatever. And at this point, I don't think Charles seen or thought about anybody other than Michelle. So eventually, Catherine told Charles that they told her, they forced her hand basically, telling her that the only help Michelle could have is if Charles was not able to have a say-so in how she was treated. And quite naturally, Charles was furious. All of this. Well, when Catherine got home after Charles stole Michelle, she got home, and there was Charles. Basically, he was like, you either with me or against me, and if you're against me, you can just go now, because I'm not taking Michelle back to the hospital. So, and she got worse and worse under Charles's care, or to the untrained eye like you and me. You know, it looks like she was getting worse and worse, but as books go, she actually was improving. It took a little time, pretty good bit of time. But as time goes on, Jean Paul and Chuck found out about it. And one day, they just came back to the house. And when the police got in behind or realized that Charles was holed up there at the house with Michelle, they went in trying to get her. But between Charles, Jean Paul, and Chuck, they were able to push law enforcement back. They got them out the way. And Charles basically told his boys the same thing he told Catherine: either you're with me or against me, and if you are against me, you need to go back wherever you came from, because I'm not giving in. But after he told them that, they refused to leave. And Charles was greatly relieved by that. And this is when whatever fractures of he had with his children, they started to heal, especially with Chuck. Now, needless to say, Michelle did make a full recovery, And Charles, when all of this was going on, they told him, that he had been fired. But after it was all said and done, and they found out that the waste site really was, because what they were doing was when they would bring hazardous chemicals, they just dump them in the water, and so that made the whole area for miles. It contaminated everything and a lot of stuff. Well, they didn't want that to get out, but Charles pretty much, he was like, had they worked with me in the beginning, we might have been able to do a safer route. I don't know what it would have been, but I would have been willing to work to see if we could make this happen. But when they just fought me at every turn, no, all bets are off. So after they went in and they got Michelle and got her to the hospital and found out that it was a slow improvement, but she healed. She healed. She was able to go back home. She was able to laugh and talk and kid with her brothers. It was just a good thing. So what went on with the waste site and the research lab that Charles worked for? Now, the waste site just did not want, obviously, for it to get out that the chemicals being offloaded there on their premises was being filtered back out into the water supply and in the soil and all of that. So Charles pretty much had them right where he wanted. And then meaning, they were like, well, what can we do to keep this under wraps? And he thought about it for a while, and he was like, well, I want to be my own researcher. I don't want anybody over me trying to hide things from me. Once I suspect, I need to be able to prove right or wrong, this is what it is. And basically, because he had lost his job, they just hadn't formally fired him yet at the research lab, but it was restored. But with that, if he ever suspected anything, he said he wanted the right to be able to pursue it without, his job being threatened. Now, after all of that happened, that was all fine, well and good. Then his marriage was restored because they were on the verge of getting a divorce when all of this stuff first started happening. And his sons, Jean-Paul, was continuing to do whatever he was studying in college, but Chuck, his relationship with his dad, it improved tremendously when he had to be there for, I guess, basically for his little sister, but it didn't hurt that it also restored or renewed his relationship with his father. It even went so far as to say Chuck, who went from not really caring to go to college or have anything to do with what his dad wanted, all of a sudden now he wants to be a research scientist. And this is how that book ended. This was my first time ever reading anything by him or in this genre, period, medical fiction. And so I find myself going down this road. Why, I don't know, but I am glad I did. It was pretty much exciting from beginning to end. Now, it's a book because although in real life they'll tell you that rarely somebody might survive what Michelle had, some rare form of leukemia, but most of the time they don't, unfortunately. And then for this man to be able to just tell them, I want to work and I don't need any supervisors over me, and he got his wish. That was good. But I think the only thing realistic about the ending for me was his marriage being renewed, and then the relationship that he has started to build with his son, Chuck. All right, book connectors, that wraps this book up, so I'll start on another one. I don't know, you may not see me for a couple of weeks, but just know that I'll be compiling notes for the next book I post. And then we can go from there. But everybody, please, please, please know that I sincerely thank you to my subscribers for being subscribed. Visitors, thank you for viewing the channel. Feel free to join us. And everyone, please do not forget to like, share, comment respectfully, and make sure your notification bells are on and set to all. And in the meantime, book connectors, remember this: as long as there are books around, there is always something to read. And until we read again, book connectors, goodbye. Have a wonderful work week. Be safe out there. And God bless.